Well, joining us now is Maureen, who lives in East London, who says it's a kick in the teeth to her generation who have paid taxes all their lives. Good morning, Maureen.
Good morning.
Lovely to have you with us this morning. So, look, how do you feel, Maureen, about the fact that you're suddenly going to have to pay for your TV licence?
Very angry, although, quite frankly, we would sooner that it was our pension that increased rather than have to pay the fee for the TV licence.
What does the TV mean to you, Maureen? How important is the TV in your life, and what do you like watching, really?
I like documentaries, travel programmes and some jolly good crime thrillers, films.
Are you not a Tipping Point fan, then? Maureen, this is awkward now. You haven't mentioned Tipping Point.
I don't even know what Tipping Point is.
Oh, Maureen, it's gone from bad to worse. Maureen, don't you...
You're my favourite guest of the morning.
Don't you worry about that, Maureen.
It is important. So the thing is, obviously, Maureen, there are you will have to pay it, and do you think that you can afford to pay it? You're going to have to. Will you be able to afford to pay it, do you think?
Yes, but do remember there are other ways of watching TV, or rather watching films. We don't need to have a television.
So do you watch things on some of the streaming services, Maureen? You're not necessarily just watching those documentaries, because the BBC do make some wonderful documentaries, don't they? How much would you miss them if you suddenly weren't having access to those channels?
Well, there are still some BBC programmes that we can see in other ways. The beauty of, unfortunately, the beauty of the BBC is the fact that they don't have advertising. We're pretty fed up with some of the advertising that repeats over and over again. In fact, I use those times to go to the loo and to do a small job.
You're amazing. Although, just to remind you, you're on ITV and the ads pay for us. But anyway, Maureen, listen, the thing is, you are very tech savvy, aren't you? Because I think you did an IT degree when you were 50. Yeah. And at the moment, I think this is right, that you're on the committee of the North London branch of the British Computer Society, and you're in your 80s. Do you think that actually that is one area of life that the over-70s have certainly been ignored, that we haven't upskilled our older generation to be able to use all those services? So now all of a sudden they're reliant on the TV and they have to start paying for it when they didn't, TV, and they're sort of being left out in the cold in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. I am a bit of an exception to the rule. And you've got to think of, why did I do that degree at 50? I did that degree at 50 because I didn't have the opportunity. After the war, conditions were very bad, and we just scrabbled about just trying to make a living. You have to remember that after the war, all the breadwinners were killed during the war, and we had to, our mothers had to look after us by themselves, and they couldn't earn a decent wage because most of them hadn't been trained or have any particular useful skills.
So, Maureen, if you could have a conversation with the Director General of the BBC, what would you say to him about abolishing this free TV licence for over-75s?
First of all, I think it's partly the government's fault. This was a government initiative and they've dumped it on the BBC. So my heart does go out to them. I'm very sorry that they've been lumbered with this problem. But I think it's small price to pay for the misery and the conditions that this particular group of people had to put up with after the war.
And do you worry that lots of people of your age will be left wondering whether they can afford it and having to make a choice, really, about having an empty, lonely home without the sound of human contact, really, which is what the TV provides, or paying their other bills? I mean, for many older people, it will come down to that, won't it? And how do you feel about that?
It will. Yes, it will. 10 years of austerity have put us in a very bad place. We've lost all our benefits, and we've been struggling now for 10 years on a miserable pension. Fortunately, as a teacher, I had a teacher's pension scheme. So I'm one of the lucky ones, but I'd like to speak up for those that are stranded on the standard pension.
Well, look, you've done exactly that this morning, Maureen. We could talk to you all day. Sadly, we haven't got enough time to do.
What time's tipping point on, by the way?
4 o'clock this afternoon, Maureen.
4 o'clock this afternoon, Maureen.
ITV. Enjoy a little bit of tipping point. There'll be some breaks so you can nip off and do your little jobs in between. But I think you might enjoy it. And we've certainly enjoyed meeting you. It's lovely to get your perspective. You are there. It affects you directly. And it's hugely important that we do hear your voice. So thank you for joining us. To discuss this further, we also have the broadcaster and founder of the Helpline for Older People, Silverline, Dame Esther Ranson. She wants the plan to make the over-75s pay the licence fee ditched. And also joining us is former BBC Royal correspondent Jenny Bond, who says pensioners should pay if they can. Jenny, if we can start with you. I mean, Maureen is a great example, as Ranveer was saying, of someone who has been upskilled. She's obviously very tech savvy and understands there are other ways in which you can watch TV. You don't have to just have a TV licence and watch the BBC. She can afford to pay it, but she knows what a huge impact that's going to have on a lot of her friends, and a lot of people have been through all sorts of austerity throughout their lives, and it just isn't fair that she is now going to have to fork out this £157 when already she's living off a very small pension.
Yes, I absolutely feel for her. I think we should remember here, we're not just talking about television, though. There's a multitude of platforms that are funded by this license fee. I mean, all our radio, and I would be lost without my radio. Radio is my friend, my companion all day long. It is a dilemma for the BBC, but I do think that the generation that's coming up to 75, I'm 69, my husband is 80, but the generation coming up to 75, there's a lot of us who were that generation, who had a free degree. You know, we were paid almost to go to university, many of us. We then got good jobs. Many of us have gold-plated pensions, end-of-salary pensions. We can afford this. And so my view is that those who can afford to pay for the BBC, and by God, I love the BBC. I don't work for it anymore, but I would be lost without it, like so many pensioners. If you can afford, if you're a 40% taxpayer, then surely that means test could be applied and we pay.
Esther, you obviously launched Silverline, and you hear from a lot of vulnerable, lonely, elderly people. You're obviously, I think, against this idea. What's your view on how it can be solved and what we can do for those older people who will now have to find that quite a substantial amount of money, really?
Well, I would like to make a plea to older people who have too much pride to apply for the pension credit, because it's time you recognise that you are valued, that you've earned the pension credit. Please apply for it, because if you do apply for it, then you will continue to be able to claim the free television licence. Now, the other thing I'd like just to point out is that older people have had a very tough time during the pandemic and continue, I think, in many cases to self-isolate. I'm 80, just turned 80, and I'm not going out anywhere. I'm not going to restaurants. I certainly won't go to the theatre. I'm not travelling on public transport because I know if I get this illness, it's going to be particularly serious. So for people like me in isolation, the television, the BBC is especially important. And I think it's really bad timing for the BBC to announce this now. I think they should wait a little longer until we've got used to the idea that the world's coming back to normal. But let's not let the politicians off the hook. I was unimpressed by the Minister for Culture having a good time, sport, all those things in his portfolio, who said he felt let down by the BBC. Come on, young man. It was a politician, Gordon Brown, who decided to give older people free TV licenses, and it was another politician, George Osborne, who decided to take it away. This is a political decision. Don't try and blame the BBC for it.